Animation, animation is a recent industry that has emerged over the past century. In 1939, Lillian Friedman Astor, eventually named one of the first female animators, applied to animate at Disney Animation Studios after accumulating nearly a decade's worth of experience creating cartoons. She worked on iconic films like Betty Boop and Popeye and helped define the early days of animated film. But she was rejected. Maybe you could speculate that her skills were not up to par, or they found someone else for the job. But the letter she was sent was one already drafted and sent out to aspiring women animators by default. Quote, "Your letter of some time ago had been turned over to the inking and painting department for reply. Women do not do any of the creative work in connection to preparing the cartoons for the screen, as that work is entirely prepared by young men. For this reason, girls are not considered for the training school. To qualify for the only work open to women, one must be well trained in the use of pen and ink and also watercolor." End quote. This was not unusual. Until the 1940s, women were only considered for the ink and paint department, a job where women would ink over rough animation on clear cells and then paint the cells to create the final image on screen. It was highly technical, yet was not considered creative work. Despite this, women continued to work in the animation industry, usually in low numbers and sometimes not credited at all. Once contained into the ink and paint department, they gradually made their way out into the story department, visual development department, and through time as animated film and TV directors. But after nearly a century, how many animated movies can we think of that were directed by women? Currently, I'm a senior BFA animation student here at the School of Visual Arts. But in my first year here at SVA, I had a conversation with someone dear to me who had surveyed our peers on their ultimate career goals. Everyone that wanted to open animation studios, become film directors, or be showrunners happened to be men versus my female and non-binary peers. I thought it was a weird pattern, and with no explanation why, I mulled this over the next couple of years. Flash forward to my senior year of college, and now I can expect a familiar story when I sit in as an audience member in a Woman in the Industry panel. Established as a safe space, I prepare to hear the experiences of women who faced misogyny and were harassed in the workplace, but at the same time, hear fervent calls of action for more women to become directors and leaders. In this, I have found a common trend of advice that's contradictory. Women need to uplift each other and get more leadership positions, but at the same time, prepare to jump ship at any moment to protect ourselves from a hostile environment? So, how is it possible to rise the ranks? Here at SVA, we have a student club dedicated to women in animation and other underrepresented genders. When I went to their first meeting, I was introduced to staggering statistics about gender representation in the modern animation industry. Out of 120 of the top animated films between 2007 to 2018, 3% of movies were directed by women. 1% was directed by a woman of color. That's 4 women in total, with only 1 woman of color. In TV, there's more generous statistics. 13% of animated film directors were women, with 2% being women of color. That's 16 women within that decade, with only 3 women of color. At the same time, the representation of females in animation is rising. 20 of the top 120 animated films had a female lead or co-lead. That's 17%. In TV, 39% of casts were filled with female characters. While low, our representation of leads in front of the screen contrasts with our representation of leads behind it. So, who is telling our stories on our behalf? How much are we in control of our own narratives? Most women before 1942 were sent that rejection letter I showed earlier, but those who did get into creative roles were at the sole discretion of executives like Walt Disney himself. Women had to prove themselves as exemplary already in order to be hired, compared to being given the chance to learn through the traineeship they were barred from. But having the ultimate creative leadership role of director still was not plausible. This is important to me as a young artist, as I have to know what to be ready for as a future generation of animators. Why do men dominate the animation industry? Becoming acquainted with the animation industry in recent years, I've often heard a term thrown around regarding it as a boys' club. In a creative space like animation, being encouraged to spark ideas is as much created by the social environment as it is by the artistic process itself. This is elicited by like-minded people, of which historically happen to be predominantly men. Things that become normalized in the past eventually get integrated into work culture. As demonstrated by the early days of animation, the deep roots of women artists being undervalued were echoed even as creative teams began to diversify in the latter 20th century. Story artist Sylvia Moberly Holland was the closest to having a creative leadership role when she was a story lead on Fantasia's Waltz of the Flowers, but even then is described as being, quote, fraught with drama as her male staff resented taking orders from a woman. In the early days of animation, production roles were extremely limited to men because, in conventional gender roles, the man controlled the money in the house. This eventually changed, and now women are more likely to be represented or gain leadership roles in production management. This is because these jobs are seen as organizational, data-driven, and not creative. Nowadays, there's more women on this side of animation. 39% of animated film producers were women, with 5% being women of color. 37%. But this historical legacy of women don't do creative work is echoed when this is compared to the number of women in creative leads. We have come a long way in giving women opportunities since the 20th century. We think the fight is over, but after this evidence, the history of this industry has carried over into today. An accepted history of patriarchy in this industry has made these statistics hard to penetrate. Because we don't have a lot of female leaders to historically reflect on in animation, it gives us less reference in moving forward with more leadership roles for women. The more we as an industry can give women the opportunity to have these creative leadership roles, and the more we as audience members share our interests in new representatives holding these positions, the more we can broaden the narrative of what women leadership will look like, giving the chance for young creatives like me to look and say, I can do that too. In the face of history, we see the stage that is set for us to change it. Fortunately, there is a rising amount of women film and TV directors. There is also a rising number of women learning animation, but these are numbers not reflected in the industry. According to the report, 60% of animation students are women, but that goes down to 20% in the professional industry. So why does this happen? A friend of mine who worked in production coordination with career aspirations for a higher position had a sole older woman to look up to. She was the only woman with a position of leadership on her team and eventually left what she found was an unhealthy work environment. My friend was disheartened by the loss of an ally. This pattern of leaving industries where the odd one out continues, and when it does, who will champion those left behind? In my research, many professionals who recognize this concern point towards avoiding big studios entirely and going indie. While there is merit in taking this path, it doesn't challenge the biggest studios and industry culture to change as a whole. There's also an aspect of this where, because of societal expectations and gender norms, women are discouraged from being more assertive and are less likely to ask for higher positions. I bring this back to the conversation I had with my peer at SVA on career goals. Why weren't more of my female peers dreaming farther up the leadership ladder? Why was I not? When I go to these women in the industry panels, I find myself simultaneously excited about how the face of the industry is changing, but discouraged at the same time at how it came at the cost of dignity and allyship, of possibly getting harassed and undermined. We can identify that the animation industry has roots in the patriarchy. But if we accept that we are subject to a work culture that does not expect women to become creatives or leaders, it becomes harder to hold decision makers accountable. So to my young professionals, find your allies and find your sponsors. Build strong communication networks with those with similar career goals as you and share every opportunity to pull each other up. As a teacher of mine at SVA once said, a rising tide raises all ships. I think about the women who are rejected that had the potential to become great directors just if they were given the chance, the same opportunity to be taught by a mentor. So to my mentors in the industry, I hope you recognize the power you have in elevating and changing the face of the industry. You have the chance to uplift people who may not look like you and may not have the same connections that you do. This isn't a battle solely fought in a differentiation of gender. There are women I talk to who only got their foot through the door through their male allies. And to those of us who feel that our represented numbers are small, if we band together and call out the barriers that are in our way, our voices will be so much louder in unison. As a young person, it can be confusing to receive two conflicting pieces of advice about the industry. Get to the top, but get ready to back down. How do we change these statistics and become future leaders if the cumulative experiences of women allude to being undermined over and over again? The historical precedent of studios filtering out women works against us, creating a culture and a system that is not built for us, nor expects us. With societal problems like gender equity, it's hard to feel like we can make a surmountable change within our lifetimes. But the first step towards a solution is identifying the problem and where it comes from. Representation matters so much, especially as storytellers. Having a diverse creative team only emboldens its strength in telling stories about more facets of life. When creative members of this team have had contact with these experiences, it only enriches the depths of an authentic story. Because of these factors, I yearned for what individual action I could take to change this. Thus, I recently shifted my career goal to becoming a director of animated films. As shown by the study, women of color only make up 1% of animated film directors. Wouldn't that be incredible to contribute to? From discovering the low statistics, to hearing the experiences of my industry peers, and learning the personal art journeys of artists like Lillian Friedman Astor, who eventually gave up on animation after being pushed out of an industry that did not want the voices she wanted to represent, I've realized the stage has been set for a next generation. In sharing my story of the factors that led to my decision to pursue directing, I hope to inspire all of you to consider an industry we can change together. Thank you.